biggest is a 7.1. Intensity is what you feel. So we have here a map of what the shaking intensities were up around the Ridgecrest area. Notice that they are going into red. That is intensity 9. The 6.4, we only got up into orange. Intensity 8 had been the maximum. So this was definitely stronger shaking, and unfortunately it looks to be the pretty high levels of shaking there in Ridgecrest. 4.6, okay.
How far was this from the main shock yesterday?
All right, so remember earthquakes don't happen at points, so, all right, they're planes. The 6.4 actually seemed to have happened on 2 planes. All right, let's go back to the, yeah, thanks. Oh, hard to see it now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a northwest striking surface and there is a southwest striking surface. This one, as what we can tell at this point, it looks like it happened on the northwest striking feature because we saw several. Notice the red boxes, the up at the northwest corner of the big box. That's showing us aftershocks happening northwest of the main shock, and that implies that's the direction that the fault went. Here we're seeing it a little. Yeah, we're still struggling to get up a good figure.
Right. But the epicenter of the 7.1 in relation to 6.4.
Okay, the epicenter of the 7.1 is at the northwest end of the fault that moved in the 6.4. Now the 5.4 aftershock this morning extended that fault. What we saw from the main shock, from the 6.4, the 5.4 extended it a bit to the northwest, and this 7.1 seems to have extended it even farther to the northwest. So the fault is growing. We ruptured a piece in the first earthquake. We ruptured a bit more in the 5.4 this morning, and we're rupturing more now. It is moving towards the northwest, away from the metropolitan area, as far as we can tell.
And a 5% chance this will go even further.
Right. This is another earthquake. Everyone has a chance. I'm trying to think if we've ever seen a situation with a 6.4 or 7 and then something even bigger, and I can't think of one. Not that it isn't possible, but I can't give you an example where it's happened before. We've had foreshocks to a lot of other earthquakes. The Landers earthquake, which is 7.3. 2 months earlier, there was a 6.1 called the Joshua Tree earthquake. That's a far enough apart that we don't usually use the word foreshock. We call it a pre-shock. There was a 3.8 a couple of hours before the 7.3. In 1987, the Superstition Hills earthquake, 6.6, was preceded the day before by a 6.2. So that's why we keep on saying 1 in 20 chance. Well, this is the 20.
Lucy, can you talk about the 6.4 yesterday and how it relates to the 7.1? Which was the main quake, which is the pre?
Okay. By definition, because the 7.1 is the largest, we give it the name main shock. So yesterday or an hour ago, we were calling the 6.4 the main shock. It has now had an aftershock that's bigger than itself, and so we changed the name. And the 6.4 is now a foreshock, and that really large aftershock has become the main shock. As far as we can tell, those names, foreshock, main shock, aftershock, are semantic. There are tools for trying to describe what's going on, but when you have a sequence going on, every earthquake makes another earthquake more likely, and that's what we're seeing right here.
And you're already having aftershocks. Can you talk about how many, how big?
Well, all right, so just look right down here on the lower part. Since the 7.1, we are only seeing basically the 4s and 5s showing up. We've had 1, 2, 3, about 10. Oh, 5.7. Okay, so we have an earthquake that's already begun up north, just slightly to the northwest of the main shock. Our early warning system is saying 5.7 with 26 seconds till it gets here. The one that was a 4.9, we felt. So this, assuming that the magnitude isn't really misestimated, my guess will be we'll feel this as it comes through. In about
10
12
seconds.
10 seconds.
And do we expect this magnitude of aftershocks throughout the rest of the evening?
Well, yeah, the largest aftershock is likely to be a 6.
Let's wait, here we go.
We should be feeling it now.
Yeah?
Very,
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
feel it?
Felt something.
Yeah.
That was the phone ringing.
That was less than I felt from the one that was labeled as
Yeah.
4.9. So,
Associated Press felt it.
Yeah. All right.
all right. So clearly we're a long ways away from the earthquake. We're still, can we feel it? Remember that the people in Ridgecrest are going through a lot worse than this. We already had damaged houses and structure fires out of the first earthquake. This is going to have been more intense shaking. Okay, this came through just as a 3.5.
And Lucy, this was all on the same fault line as the 6.4?
Well, yes, the same fault system. It does appear to have multiple strands to it. We've already seen the two perpendicular ones. I think it got the magnitude wrong, because, yeah, unless it hasn't come through yet. So,
Dr. Jones, can you explain the shake alert again? Because some people just got the initial report that it, quote unquote, wasn't working. Can
Okay.
you explain again that?
let's let the USGS handle that one.
Yeah. So the system worked.
Oh, that was a 5.1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Shake Alert system worked both on the USGS side and on the Shake Alert LA side. The reason why alerts or notifications didn't go out to LA County is that the threshold for shaking was set above what the estimated shaking would be. So it was just the way that the system was designed. And in fact, the same thing happened again tonight. My understanding, the alerts did not go out on Shake Alert LA. A magnitude that was estimated with a early warning system was 6.2. So the initial magnitude estimate was too low. Consequently, the intensities were below that threshold. So the system is not perfect, but again, what was experienced here in Pasadena, LA area, these were not damaging ground motions. What's going on up in Ridgecrest, those are damaging ground motions. So those folks are really feeling it.
And Robert, what's the chance of another large quake like this, or even larger tonight?
Well, as Dr. Jones had said, there's a 5% chance that this could be followed by an even larger quake.
This week or in?
Well,
The number of 5% is usually for a few days. The most likely time is within a day, which is what, of course, we just saw, 30 hours or something, 36 hours.
yeah,
But you had
in
said
fact,
earlier that you don't recall of any size earthquake sequence where a 7.1 was followed by a greater earthquake.
Oh, no, I just don't remember one that's had this, in California, that's had that series. There are places elsewhere in the world. There was a magnitude 8.5 that was a foreshock to a 9.5 in Chile.
Wow.
So there is nothing about the magnitude that says it can't be a foreshock.
Right, but in California, along this, in the seismicity of this state, you've never seen anything follow a 7.1.
boy. Yeah, but that doesn't mean.
We have,
saying
no,
it
no,
happened
we
the
have
same
in
day.
Nevada. We have in Nevada the
Yeah.
Fairfield earthquakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got
The
geologists.
takeaway here, though, is that as we have just seen between yesterday and today, quakes that we say are main shocks can actually be foreshocks to larger quakes. So,
And we won't know till it does or doesn't happen.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, there's a small
Is this 7.1
percentage.
the same depth for the most part as the 6.4?
Yeah, well, it's 17 kilometers.
Yeah, so the epicenter's a little bit deeper. We do have geologists out in the field. We haven't got reports back, but they'll be able to go out and.
You said
document.
But
5
also
to 10
remember-
miles? You said 5 to 10 miles?
So that's the 10
That's
miles,
10 miles.
right? It's 10 miles down, whereas the one yesterday was more like 6 or 7 miles down. However, a bigger earthquake also involves a larger fault, so it still may very well, probably this is coming to the surface. Yeah.
Is there,
What you're really worried about is, are we going to trigger something outside of this region?
right,
Probably not, okay?
Why?
Because we're too far away. The ability to trigger another earthquake is very spatially defined. So the most likely place to trigger it is at the same on the same fault. As you go away with distance, it becomes much less likely.
how far is that from the San Andreas?
Quite a ways. It's not even on that figure. It's over 100 miles to the San Andreas from this location.
And the Garlock?
The Garlock fault is a lot closer. And the Garlock Fault is another long fault. If we were going to be triggering something really big, the Garlock might be a source for it. This is sort of like when landers happened near the San Andreas. And we said, oh, if we're going to set off something bigger, there's only the San Andreas around. Of course, it didn't happen. But it was a possibility, a low probability possibility. The Garlock, luckily, really runs through some of the most isolated parts of California.
You said yesterday there were two faults making this L pattern, so there was that lower little leg, and
Right.
now the top part, that's the part that's extended.
It's the northwest part that's extended and grown, whereas the southwest striking one doesn't seem to have had more earthquakes.
Is that a surprise at all to you, that this fault system was capable of this kind of earthquake?
No. There was a magnitude 7.5 in 1872 in the Owens Valley. There have been lots of 6s. There's this whole series. When I said Nevada, 1915 and 1954, and I don't have the magnitudes in my head this time, but they were 7s. There were series of earthquakes with several events within them of 6 to 7. In Mammoth in 1980, there were 4 magnitude 6.5s that happened in one sequence over about 10 days. This part of California is characterized by these type of groups of earthquakes, that there might be several that end up larger. The first one is often not the biggest one. Knowing that which one is the biggest one means waiting till we see that we aren't getting another one.
When was the last time we had something sizable on Garlock?
Not in the historic record.
Prehistoric.
Prehistoric.
This is extending about 25 miles, you said earlier?
That's an approximate guess off of looking at these figures, which are having trouble coming up.
That northwestern fault, is that the one that's moving into China Lake?
The southwest striking one is the one that goes sort of from China Lake down to Ridgecrest. The northwest is going up through the China Lake Navy
So this
base.
was-
I know that there has been trouble trying to get geologists onto base. Have you guys made any progress on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, our geologists have contacted the Navy and are able to get on the base with some limited access. Now, that was prior to tonight's event. So presumably, well, I would expect that there may be further damage on the naval base. We don't know yet. I haven't gotten reports. But my suspicion is that the geologists are going to be able to get out there very quickly and look at potential rupture. The other comment here, just following on what Dr. Jones was saying, when we have events that where a main shock then becomes a foreshock, typically the triggering is relatively close, and that's actually what we saw here. These two earthquakes are relatively closely located, so the triggering typically does not happen at a great distance. More typically, it's close by.
I can't think of any example where we've seen this type of foreshock triggering that isn't within just a matter of a few kilometers. I mean, the famous widespread one was Elmore Ranch and Superstition Hills, a 6.2 that was on a southwest striking fault and then set off a 6.6 on a northwest striking fault, sort of like this. The epicenter of Elmore Ranch was up here, but the fault extended right down to the Superstition Hills. And we were seeing aftershocks pounding at the Superstition Hills fault up until the time that the earthquake happened, the main shock happened. And we've got a similar situation here where we've had aftershocks along this fault. And then we had the 5.4 breaking through a bit towards the northwest, and now we've had it again. And we now see more aftershocks up to the very northwest end. And chances are we stop now. It's possible that we'll continue to extend up to the northwest.
Right,
How
and you said for a
similar, you know,
7.1 magnitude quake, you could expect an aftershock sequence that lasts for over a year.
Yes. All right, so the 7.3 Landers earthquake, the last magnitude 5 to that 1992 earthquake happened in 1998, so 6 years after the main shock. We should be expecting to record earthquakes here for a long time.
Can you describe that terrain of where this aftershock was, or where this main shock was?
Well, the terrain is very isolated. It's desert, not a lot of population. So actually, in a sense, for being able to get people out there and look at it, there's a good opportunity. And also because it's not densely populated, the chance of having damage to structures and injuries is much lower. But it is still very, it's hard rock. These are faults that are breaking through hard rock. That's why they create these waves that we feel strongly, even down here in Los Angeles. There we go. Now we
There
got
one
the-
more, actually. We do.
Yeah, we're now getting some of our
Okay.
graphics up. So
Okay.
Lucy, if you want to describe
Yeah.
this, and I can kind of point and
Right.
help you.
So the blue means it happened more than an hour ago, but less than 24 hours ago. You can actually see some yellow underneath because we're more than 24 hours since the main shock. But all those blue dots are the aftershocks over the last 24 hours, and that's the red ones are within the last hour. So the main shock has already turned blue,
It's actually right under
and that's
the-
right there. The the epicenter of the 6.4 was basically at that corner,
Right here.
and we think ruptured, well, clearly ruptured to the southwest, probably also some rupture to the northwest in the same event, maybe in the aftershocks afterwards. Then the 5.4 aftershock was, the one this morning was located right in there, moved the fault a little farther. Then we have the 7. And now look at that cluster up to the northwest. We think, you know, right now we aren't getting many of our aftershocks recording yet. The system's pretty strung out. And pretty sure that that is a continuous aftershock zone, and that would mean that's the extent of the fault.
Yeah, so you
And,
can just.
right, and just the length of the fault, a magnitude 7.1, we would expect that it's probably at least about 25 miles long. And that would imply probably that whole length from where the 6.4 happened up to where those aftershocks are up in the corner.
That says China Lake up there,
This
where
is-
the red is.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
naval air.
Oh, yeah, right, the Naval Air Station is that whole area, so this is all within the Naval Air Station. There's a fault system, so we see all these little faults on the ground. Rather than naming each little piece separately, it's been called the Little Lake Fault System. And so that's, you know, these are,
So the length of the fault itself has been defined by the 7.1 earthquake?
no, it could, we don't know.
You don't know it, it's.
Right, and if you look at the mapping that we can see there, and one of the things we can do if we got a bit of a break and found some stuff, we can pull out,
We'll give you a break soon.
we'll try to get out the state geology map and really see the detailed mapping that's been done in here beforehand. But notice that there's this little string of, you see where the cursor's showing you all those little faults going up to the northwest. And it was not mapped as a through-going fault, it was little pieces up through here, and now we have more little pieces farther up. So no, we can't say, oh, the fault's used up. It would, but most likely if we were to see more going on, I would think it more likely that we're heading to the northwest than turning around and coming to the south again.
You've
So
got
the surface rupture, how close would that be to the epicenter? I mean, are they tied together?
They are the same, like the epicenter is only the place where the fault started to move. It is not the location of the earthquake. The earthquake happens over the whole fault surface. And just like if I were going to try to tear this, I can't do this. What I would do is I'd start a tear here and then rip down this way. And this would be the epicenter, this would be the fault surface. The earthquake's happening over this whole fault. So we think that what's happening here is a fault about 25 miles long. We started at the end, the part that hadn't broken before the 7.1. Potentially it ruptured in both directions. About 80% of earthquakes are unilateral rupture in one direction, and about 20% rupture in both directions.
So on the 178, there was a left lateral slip of about 6 inches. Could we expect that to grow?
That's actually, the left lateral one is down on the southwest striking fault.
It's way
So,
down here.
so down here, and it's not at all clear that that part has moved in the 7.1.
So do you know what kind of earthquake it was yet? And
What do you
how
mean by
find it?
kind
Like,
of earthquake?
the
It's a
slip-
strike
was
slip,
it
it's strike slip,
slip?
it's strike slip.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's something that we can get from the seismic records, and it's very clearly strike slip.
Yeah, and just to follow on with that, the event yesterday was left lateral strike slip, which actually released some compression on what we think is the fault that ruptured this evening in the 7.1. This event presumably is a right lateral strike slip, but basically motion horizontally. And again, with this magnitude and this length, the expectation of having surface rupture is much, much greater. And by being able to go out and actually measure it, in a 7.1, I'm trying to think back for landers, there was up to, 10 feet of displacement.
18 feet was the maximum
18 feet.
displacement
So
in the
When you say
landers.
18 feet of displacement.
Meaning if the
does that
fault
mean-
ran between you and me,
Mhm.
right now we're looking at each other, after the earthquake, I would be 18 feet
18
farther
yeah,
down
right.
there.
Yeah.
There was a school of thought a while ago that the seismicity of the state was moving straight up, as opposed to San Andreas. And you had Landers, you had Hector Mine, now you have this. Does this add to that academic debate?
Right, that debate was not on human timescales. That was saying we were moving over there in the next few million years.
But and actually, let me turn that around a little bit. I think these events are a reminder that we can have earthquakes anywhere in Southern California. And on a human time frame, as Dr. Jones is explaining, an event like today's could occur in the LA Basin. It could occur down south in the San Diego area. That's just because we live in an area that has many, many active faults.
Right, but if you have an earthquake fault, earthquake of 7.1 magnitude, 150 miles away from the major metropolitan area, and you suffer damage here, you're in big trouble. Because
Was there damage in the Los Angeles area?
No, my point is we get calls and
Oh.
we ask for it. And there's a report of a power outage or somewhere. The region has to sustain a 7.1 150 miles away.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for the most part, the region has. I think the incidences are probably somewhat isolated. I would be very surprised if there was much widespread impact in the Los Angeles area. But clearly up near the epicentral region, the Ridgecrest area, those folks are having to deal with a lot right now. We haven't gotten any direct reports here, but I'm sure there's lots of damage and they are probably dealing with aftershocks as well.
You're waiting to hear from your geologists. What information will they provide?
Well, they're going to be out in the field as soon as they can and as best they can. Obviously, it's nighttime right now. They may be limited. This is the Naval Air Weapons Station. Okay, so there's unexploded ordnance issues. They may not be able to get out there at night. When they get out there, they'll have to be escorted. That all those logistics are something they're going to determine.
But
there.
what they're looking for is finding a fault where we find that motion that's happened. Because we are seeing, with our seismometers, we see these waves coming off of here and we calculate back, they're probably coming off of the surface. When we get those field geology, it's like this fault has moved. And so it's ground truth.
We know that the
And
Navy
what
is
was
testing
examined,
munitions
yes.
out there. Is there any chance at all
No.
that anything underground from the Navy may have triggered any of this?
No.
Look, we've set off pretty large nuclear blasts without ever setting off an earthquake. The largest earthquake, I think, set off by the largest nuclear blast
Yeah.
is like a magnitude 2.
And the hypocenter for this one is down at 10 miles beneath the surface.
Is there anything about this earthquake that's surprising at all to you?
The size.
Well, no, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, as Dr. Jones was explaining yesterday after the 6.4, there was a possibility of having a larger event. And sure enough, we did. And, the mechanics of these two faults, the conjugate faulting, actually makes a lot of sense from a geologic or scientific perspective. So I would say no, there's not really any surprises that we've seen so
What can
far.
you learn from it?
Well, hopefully, number one, learn a little bit more about how earthquakes work. Number two, I think, there's teams out there looking at damage, how buildings responded. Every earthquake is a chance to learn what worked, what didn't work, and make improvements.
And obviously, a better understanding of earthquake triggering. Hopefully, we'll be able within this, because we have, I can go and rattle off all these previous earthquakes where we've seen one trigger the other. The recordings we have of those earthquakes are primitive compared to what we have now, and we don't really know all of what the mechanisms were in this earthquake. With the system that we put in place to do early warning, we now have hundreds and hundreds of stations that are out there giving us much clearer pictures of what's going on the fault. So now we're going to be able to see with much greater resolution than we've had in the past, what part of which fault moved and how did the pattern progress, and of course there's always the hope that we'll find something that's different about the foreshocks.
Does this
And let me just
contact
add-
We haven't.
system,
Let me just add, in terms of learning, the Shake Alert system which has been put in place in the last few years and is constantly being tested. This is an excellent test case for that system. We'll be able, in the coming days, be able to analyze how the system performed. Are improvements required? I suspect yes, maybe in terms of estimating the magnitude. So that's another point where we'll be able to build on this event and make some progress.
I'm seeing a report from USGS that this fault is so shallow, it was technically above ground, listed as a 9 on the violent Mercalli intensity scale. What is that?
Not something coming from a scientist?
Yeah, I don't know if that, I doubt that's coming from the USGS. So earthquakes obviously cannot occur above ground.
Yeah.
All right, there are some times where our location might show up as being a negative depth, and that means something went wrong in how we located it.
Yeah.
The depth is actually much harder to construct. Going down because we don't have anything below it.
But the depth of this earthquake is similar to what you've seen before, historically in this region.
Yes. In this region, we've had somewhat deeper faults. The area is, that idea of, redirecting the San Andreas. We are seeing this area opening up. It is what the geologists call the basin and range system. So you have the big fault that's on the side of the Sierra Nevada, and then we have the faults that are forming all of the different ranges that go out through Nevada, all the way out to the Wasatch in Utah. So everything between the Wasatch and here is called the basin and range. So it's an area with lots of faults that's spreading out, and some of them happen by faults that move up and down, and some of them happen by these horizontal ones sort of squeezing out along the way. And the rate at which they happen summed up as about 10 to 20% the rate of what we see on the San Andreas. And the sort of the geological discussion, is that because it's going to eventually take over from the San Andreas, or is that some other sort of millions of years, right?
Yeah.
Not on our time scale, but it's still, this is, we sometimes call this a complex plate boundary. 2/3 of the motion happens on the San Andreas. The rest of it gets smeared out through other faults. And this is the 10 to 20% that's smeared out to the east.
You said the Wasatch, but do we see these kind of events in Utah? Or
Yeah. Well, the farther east you go, the less frequent they are. But we're pretty sure there are magnitude 7s under Salt Lake City about once every 1,000 years. And here along through this region, it's also, as I said, I think 1915 and 1954 and 1872 were all at close to magnitude 7, coming up through somewhere between here and up to Reno.
Okay, about 5 more questions.
Yeah.
And that's
Can you talk a little
I've got
bit
a
about-
question about the conjugate system here. The fact that these two are conjoined, does that add any energy to it's just happenstance that these two are connected?
As far as we can tell, actually, the better picture we get of the earthquakes as we put in more instruments, the more often we see multiple faults in the events. We think they probably really were. Most of them are like this, that we're just finally being able to resolve it.
Yeah. The way we just describe that is earthquakes were a lot simpler when we had less data. Yeah. So,
And we're back in that 5% zone again since this hit, correct?
Correct. Well, yeah.
Generally
Every earthquake has that 5% chance type of level of being a foreshock, and the fact that it had foreshocks doesn't, as far as we can tell, really change that probability.
You said before
we should be able to provide an update on those aftershock probabilities within the next hour or so as the data from this 7.1 is analyzed. So for now, 5% is kind of the ballpark figure.
Right. It might go up a little bit if we see a lot. No, the only thing I was trying to say was that we don't get the 7s very often.
When's the last time you were a 7?
The same time, last time we had a 6. The last earthquake we had above 6 was a 7.1 Hector mine in 1999, so 20 years ago.
With your hands, could you show what a left lateral slip strike looks like?
Okay, strike slip means that you slip along the strike. So the strike gives you the orientation of the fault. If you're slipping parallel to that, it's horizontal. The opposite is dip slip, where you're slipping in the direction of the dip of the fault. So strike slip, if we move, let me see. I do my thumbs, I go like this, I now have to, on this side, I have to step to the right to find the rest of my thumb. But if I went here, I also would have to step to the right.
So one stays still.
So
and the
that's
other one
right,
moves.
so, well, no, they both, that's all relative.
Yeah.
They move with respect to each other. And if they move like this, it's right lateral. If they move like this, it's left lateral.
And that's San Andreas as well, strike slip.
The San Andreas is strike slip, right lateral.
Northridge wasn't.
Northridge was a dip slip, moving up the fault, growing the mountains. So, in general, the faults are, a lot of many parts of California, we see this strike slip motion, and what it's leading to is a gradually extending of it. It isn't pushing us up or pushing us down, but it is sort of moving sideways and stretching out parts of the state.
Yesterday, you guys talked about a little bit about the lack of we've basically been in a drought period for
Right.
major earthquakes. Does this sort of confirm that, affirm that, or do you guys see it opening up
It's-
to a
it's-
new normal of some sort?
All right, this earthquake is still only one sequence. And so the fact that we've had the 7 after the 6.4 does not change. This is one sequence in that thing. We just, in geology, we can look at the geology, we can look at the long-term pattern. We know that we need to have an earthquake of at least 6 or bigger every 3 to 5 years in Southern California. It's been 20, this 20 years without any can't be the long-term normal, just because geology shows us we need more than that.
Okay, last question.
In terms of the damage that could be expected in places like Trona and Ridgeway, can you just talk more generally about how much more susceptible these buildings are coming just one day after?
That's going to be an issue, that the building that was damaged in the first earthquake is then weaker and more likely to sustain damage in this earthquake. So, but that's completely hypothetical at this point. You really need to get the engineers on the ground. There were engineers, I saw stuff today that the engineers were getting out there to inspect the buildings. Hopefully they'll be there tomorrow.
Is there any description that you were able to get from the engineers or from the field teams yesterday about what they observed? Anything else that?
Just some brief reports. There was a call earlier tonight. For example, there was a hospital that had been inspected and actually was found to be structurally okay. That was after the 6.4. So the engineers are there, and they have looked at some buildings. Clearly they're going to be looking at either the same buildings or other buildings now. But it's too early for any of that information to come back.
And remember that both the geologists and the engineers are physically looking at things, and it's a lot more difficult to do at night.
Okay, I think
In
we're
the
going
next
to.
hour, you can find out more about the aftershock sequence.
Yeah, so we're gonna, we need some time to kind of look at the data that's come in. We'll have a briefing again shortly.
Okay.
Hopefully,
About an
by-
hour? You said
well,
about
by
an hour?
10:30 we hope, because I'd like to
Yeah.
go home at, well.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.